Thank you for coming tonight. What I want to share with you is a very important idea. Mexico is a country in a very deep transformation. Why? Because our dreams are related to transform the country in order to provide to our people the best opportunities, to provide our people with the conditions to get human sustainable development. And since 2006, when I took office, we started a very deep process in order to transform the country. So let me tell you some remarks about this process. First, we started a very important battle against organized crime, because we believe in the rule of law. And I know that the only way in which the countries could prosper is through the enforcement of the law. And Mexico will be a country in which any single man or woman will be safe in the future. We are fighting because we believe that Mexican people, Mexican children, deserve better future, and one day Mexico will be a safer country. And that is the reason we started fighting directly with courage and determination organized crime. And of course, all the problems probably started from the fact that we live, Canada and Mexico, by the way, we live in a building in which our neighbor is the largest consumer of drugs in the world. But we have an additional problem, and the problem is everyone wants to sell drugs to that consumer through our door and through our window. And that was the beginning of the problem in Mexico. But now, let me clarify, this battle is not only and not mainly against drug traffickers or drug cartels. Of course, we are fighting with them, but what we are looking for is to establish the rule of law in any single small town in the country, any single community in which the criminals are threatening the people. And in these 3 years, we are using the full force of the state in order to preserve the order and the law in the country. And that this is a strategy in order to provide the local communities with the opportunity and the time to improve their own police corps and to reform their own legal, judicial, and security institutions. And at the same time, we are improving social conditions for the people. Let me tell you, we are kicking them, the criminals, and we are kicking them really hard. In 3 years, for instance, we extradited more than ever criminals to American justice, for instance, and we put in jail some of the most important leaders of the gangs in Mexico. We seized extraordinary amounts of drugs. In 3 years, for instance, we seized enough drugs to provide more than 80 doses for each young man or woman in Mexico between 15 and 30 years old. We seized, for instance, in one single operation, in one place in Mexico City, more than $2,500 million in cash. Talking about guns and weapons, in 3 years we seized 75,000 guns and weapons in Mexico, and among them 5,000 grenades, more than 8 million rounds of ammunition, 45,000 assault weapons like AK-47, missile launchers, and others. So we are working really hard in this, and our strategy is on track. We are preserving the law, we are battling, and we are confronting and facing the criminals. And as I say to the Mexican people, since the very beginning of my administration, we must fight this battle, because the future of our families is on stake. But believe me, Mexican people, this is a battle in which, together, we will win at the end. And that is true. We will win this battle. And we will win. So we are working really hard. And if you see dust in the air, it's because we are cleaning the house in Mexico. I started with it because I know that it is a very important concern for a lot of people here in Canada and around the world. But again, let me tell you that Mexico is in a deep transformation. And let me start by the economic field. During these 3 years in my administration, we passed several structural reforms in economics in Mexico that it had been impossible to do in years or even decades in the country. For instance, the first one was a pension reform, in which we passed from the old traditional system, pay-as-you-go for public servants, towards individual account system. And with this process, we are guaranteeing any single pension for public servants. And at the same time, we are saving for public finances in Mexico the equivalent of 30 points of GDP at net present value. And with that, we are saving the public finances for the future. Even in these very difficult times, in these 3 years, and in particular last year with the crisis, even with that, we passed a fiscal and tax reform. And with that, we are increasing the total public revenues different from oil revenues, gaining sound public finances. And today, even in the middle of the crisis, today Mexico has a public deficit of only 1% of GDP. So we have a very sound public finances. And that is the reason why the markets are not punishing Mexico. There is another thing that is important. We established strong regulations in the banking system. In the last crisis, no one single Mexican bank received any single cents from taxpayers in the country. The requirements on average of this banking system in Mexico, the rate of capitalization is about 14 or 15%, almost double that the standard, international standard. We made another reform related with oil, which was a very difficult and very sensitive issue for Mexican people. And today, Pemex, the state-owned company, is able to make flexible contracts with global companies. And with that, Pemex is able to get access to financing, to increase its operational capacity, and of course, to get the state-of-the-art technology in the oil sector. So Pemex very soon will recover its place as one of the most important oil companies in the world. We are assuring the energy independence of the country and contributing to the energy independence of the whole region. We made another reforms, for instance, related with security. So we are transforming our judicial system in order to establish oral trials in Mexico, in which the judges will be able to evaluate and see directly the evidence and the proofs of the parties. So we will have a more transparent and more efficient judicial system. And other reforms related with elections, politics, and transparency, and even more. As we know, we passed last year one of the worst economic crises in the world. Actually, our economy went down by 6.5% last year. It was huge. But nevertheless, we were able to put in place counter-cyclical measures in order to preserve our jobs. And we were successful in that. So today, do all these reforms and all the measures we took in the past, Mexican economy is clearly recovering. In the first quarter of this year, Mexican economy have a rate of growth of 4.3%, and we are expecting the same rate for the whole year. Talking about Mexican exports, the Mexican export grew in March at a rate of 43%. And talking about jobs, we have created, since the beginning of this year until today, more than 400,000 new jobs in net terms in Mexico, which is the largest amount of new jobs in the country ever. So we are working really hard. And even in the middle of the crisis, when all the countries were talking about new tariffs and protectionism, actually I remember a meeting in the G20, I can't remember, in Pittsburgh probably, when all the countries participating all agree that we need to avoid protectionism. So we need to avoid new tariffs, but the day after, 15 out of that 20 countries established new tariffs around the world. But it was not the case of Mexico. Actually, we reduced tariffs of an average in Mexico. And we reduced tariffs from 13% towards less than 5%. A lot of business people were afraid about that. However, with these measures, with the prudent management of macroeconomic in Mexico, with the reform that we made, and with other administrative reforms, simplification of red tape in the government, Mexico is gaining competitiveness at global level. For instance, now, according with several indicators and consultants, Mexico is the best place for manufacturing. We have the lowest cost for manufacturing products exported to the United States in the world, even lower cost than China, India, and Brazil. And one of the proof of that is the very competitive products that we have, as we were talking in the table. For instance, you have a BlackBerry with you, probably 70% of the BlackBerry in the world are produced in Mexico. And I can say a lot about the automotive industry and a lot of manufacturing in the country. Actually, Mexico became, we were, according with other index, for instance, A.T. Kearney said that in 2007, Mexico had the place 20 as the best place for investment in the world. And 1 year later, Mexico had the place number 8. And we are improving every year our position as the best place for investment. And Mexico is a very competitive place for several reasons, as you could see in the video. One, we have a privileged geographical and strategic position. We have access to the largest market of the world, which is the United States, the same of Canada. We have access to the economies of the East through the Pacific Sea. And at the same time, we have access to Europe through the Gulf of Mexico. And we have a very competitive infrastructure in the country that is making Mexico a logistical platform for the global economy. Actually, another thing that we are doing is investing a lot in infrastructure. The average in the last decade in Mexico of investment in infrastructure was less than 2% of GDP annually. Today, we are investing more than 5% of GDP a year in infrastructure in the country. So we are building the roads, highways, ports, airports, telecom in the country that are making Mexico the best platform for investment and trade in the world. So today, my friends, Mexico is a very good place for investment. Actually, more than 2,400 Canadian companies have business in Mexico. Several of the most important companies, and thank you for your presence here today, are investing in Mexico with very profitable operations and with a lot of success. Several industries here, banking or mines, for instance. A few weeks ago, I went to inaugurate a very big mine in Mexico called the Peñasquito. It's the little stone. It's not as little as I was thinking, but anyway. Peñasquito, and with that investment, Canadian investment, Mexico became again the largest producer of plate in the world, as in the colony. So we are working really hard in order to transform Mexican economy. We made a lot of reforms, the largest producer of silver in the world. And we are working really hard in order to transform the economy. We made a lot of reforms, and we want more. I proposed to the Congress a new antitrust law in order to combat monopolies and oligopolies practices in Mexico. I proposed a labor reform in order to provide more flexible conditions and to provide access to the labor market for young people and women. And we are pushing more reforms in the telecom sector. For instance, we are auctioning more frequencies, and today we are auctioning a backbone of fiber optic of CFE in order to provide more participants, more competitions, more providers of telecom service, including broadband, television, and internet. So that is what's happening in the economy in Mexico, and that is the reason why we are really optimistic about the future. And beyond that, in the social aspect, we are transforming the country as well. For instance, in education. When I took office, the rate of coverage for the universitarian age, between 18 and 22 years old, was only 23%. We are investing a lot in education, in particular a new campus, new universities, and today we are almost reaching 30% of coverage at that age. It was a goal that we established to reach in 2012, and we will reach this year in 2010. So in this way, every single year, 90,000 young people are graduating as engineers or technicians. And with that, we are providing them new opportunities, and at the same time, we are improving the competitiveness of our industry. Or talking about health, for instance. In 3 years, we built or rebuilt more than 1,700 hospitals and clinics in the country. That means more than one a day in 3 years. And we tripled the budget for health. And with that, my friends, Mexico will reach by the year 2012 a goal that will be great for any developed or developing country, which is universal health coverage, doctor, treatment, and medicine for any single Mexican man or women in the country that need it. At the same time, we care about our common destiny in the world. And that is the reason why Mexico was the first developing country that established a national strategy against climate change. And the first developing country that established unilateral commitment in order to reduce our own emissions. We are establishing programs in which we are paying environmental services to the people that live in jungle, rainforests, and woods in Mexico. And with that, we are providing them opportunities to live, to have better conditions, and at the same time, they are keeping and they are caring about our forestry in Mexico. Finally, talking about fighting poverty, we have a very important program so-called Oportunidades. And with Oportunidades, we are providing an economic income in cash for the poorest family in the country, for 6 million poor families in Mexico, which means 1 out of 4 members of our nation. And with that, we are providing that help under the condition that the parents bring the kids to the school and bring the kids to a regular visit to the doctor. So we are fighting the structural roots of poverty, not only providing them an income, but also providing structural opportunities of change through education and health for those people. And with this program, in only 10 years, poverty went down in Mexico from 35 million people living in extreme poverty towards 14 million people living in extreme poverty. Of course, we suffer a lot with the past economic crisis, but at the same time, even with the crisis, we increase almost 50% the budget for Oportunidades. So my point, good friends, is Mexico is much more than fighting organized crime. Mexico is a country in a deep transformation. Mexico is making the most important structural reforms in decades. And with that, Mexico is prepared for the future. We are paying the cost that implies to change a great nation like ours. More than 100 million people that will be, as he was saying, the 5th or 6th largest economy in the world in 3 decades more. Now Mexico is taking the opportunity to change. My government means that it's change for Mexico, deep transformation that Mexican people need, and with that, we will provide for those people the future that those people and our children deserve. So you will be very welcome in Mexico at any time. As tourists, 1.2 million Canadian tourists every year can assure you that Mexico is a marvelous place to visit and for rest, in a safe place. And more than 2,400 Canadian companies could tell you that Mexico is a very competitive economy in which you can make a very profitable business. Mexico will be the best place for investment in the world one day, and we are working really hard in order to get that. So thank you very much for coming, and I will attend all your questions. Thank you.